Hi guys, George with Troglodyne here to talk to you a little bit about storytelling and how this sort of has a big deal to do with your success as a software developer and how the design process goes nowadays. Things have changed a lot over the last 10 or 20 years. We went from sort of a more engineering perspective now, the way it used to be, to a more storytelling sort of scrum perspective. And a lot of people really don't sort of reflect on what that means. The fact is, this is all driven by you needing to tell a story because that's the mode most people's brain is actually in at all times. A lot of times, engineers they are so close to the problem that they're not in what is called internal monologue mode, where they're not hearing a story being told, which most people, most times of the day, that's actually how they operate. In that they have sort of this voice in their head narrating how things work, and you actually have to engage with that if you want to be able to get customers sort of on the same page with where you're at, get the people who are providing you all the sort of requirements you need, customers, whoever, uh, to get them to understand sort of where you're going with this and whether or not what you're doing is going to actually meet up with what you want. And I think that's why a lot of the old stuff like UML and other techniques that are very much more design oriented works a lot more like, say, a blueprint for making things and mass producing them. Well, it turns out going to that effort actually is not really necessary in software because mass production is very easy. You just copy the program and you're done, you know? So you don't actually have to go to that depth. Really, what you need to focus on is really, really good storytelling. So this is because once you've told the story such that people actually understand it, uh, they're not going to need to be told about how the pattern and the specific thing works directly, unless they actually start working on the code themselves, at which point, yeah, that might be helpful. But for the vast majority of people involved in the process, especially the customers, this is not only unnecessary, it might even confuse them. So you don't want them necessarily to go to that level. You want them to invest enough via the story that they start to see the camshaft in their own mind. You know what I mean? Uh, in that that's how they will instinctively get the way it works. The point is, you have to tell the story first before they'll ever get into the mode of mind where they're not thinking words, 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 where they're thinking, oh, this bone connects to the other bone, and that's why this thing works this way, is because I understand this on a deep level. Uh, the other sort of thing about when you're dealing with stories is people are going to think past the sale. It's like I said about emotional investment. They are going to naturally, once they hear the story is going to involve you developing the software, and it's going to involve your team. It's going to, in short, build a relationship, right? That's sort of what telling a story and listening to a story, this is actually how we form relationships as human beings. And if you don't tell a story, the only other thing that people have left is even lower levels of consciousness, because it sort of goes in a hierarchy from like stimulus response to building stories and sort of this predictive framework that we operate in probably 80% of the time. And then above that is the sort of like visualization and spatial intelligence and those sorts of things where, again, you see the engine in your mind, you see everything working, you see the pistons coming up off the camshaft lobes, all that kind of stuff. So again, that's the big deal, is that this, you don't want them to go into this lower level of thinking because that is where you are fully reliant on your brand. Okay. That is just going to get you either the wrong type of customers, or it's not going to get you any customers of all at all, because they're just not attracted in the first place to what you're offering, because that's sort of these mode one, as they call them, sort of attraction things. They're always going to be basically they work or they don't. All they do is get you in the door. Everybody like me, is out here putting out these videos and building reputation and sort of chasing clout online, as they call it these days. all this can do is get you in the door. This can just make people understand sort of this is the base where you're at, and then you have to build from there with more and more stories. And that's sort of what's prompted a lot of what I'm going to be putting out this week is telling stories as part of sort of a prep for, and well, in fact, actually been doing a lot of talking with prospective clients and people who want to contract with me, things like that. It's sort of the same story over and over again, right? You keep telling the same rap about what you've seen and where you've been and how that fits into the way their company needs to be. And it's a sort of sales thing to some degree, and I'm going to talk about that in some upcoming talks. But uh, a lot of when you're dealing with technical people for like a technical interview, then you have to adjust your approach. You still have to tell a story, but there are some details in the story that have to be there for them to get past their sort of skepticism that's been beaten into their head thanks to scientific method and just the reality of being an engineer or being in the scientific trades and the sort of knowledge worker economy. You're naturally going to be looking for this stuff where it's like, okay, well, where's your deeds? It's very much like a faith without deeds is dead sort of situation when it comes to evaluating people for who am I going to do business with, who am I going to do contracts with, because again, there's this I've got my foot in the door because it looks superficially like I can do all this stuff, but then it's you need to start digging down and saying, okay, well, I know how to do this stuff, but I need help doing this, or I need help doing this other thing, and they need to see that you've done this thing, or you at least understand the problem enough that you can learn to do this thing, and it's little details about those. Usually it's going to be like frustrations that you feel that are not necessarily about the exact thing. Like, oh man, I had to go through all this like a pain in the butt with some kind of rebase, or I had to deal with this particular gotcha in that the algorithm looks like this, but it turns out it has this unexpected side effect, or I had this unexpected constraint pop up whenever I was working on this particular project that is sort of adjacent to what you guys want to do. And that's the little details that build authenticity. And that's sort of what it's about is you have to build trust essentially, and there's several techniques for doing that. Sort of the classical way that people do this, and con artists use this as well, is called give something to get something, where basically it's like, you go up front with humility and you say, okay, well, here's where I've done something like this and here's where I've actually messed up, and now this is how I learned from it. It shows sort of a little bit of vulnerability that makes people think that, oh, okay, well, this guy's on the level with me, because normally whenever you're in an interview, you would think that people want to actually like show that they're super awesome. Yeah, check out my muscles, right? I don't have flaws, which actually that is going to make people more suspicious of you with regard to being a charlatan than not. You actually have to show a little bit of weakness up front, a little bit of sort of a gift to these people so that they start to trust you. And anybody who's been in the industry for long enough is going to have all these stories where it's like, oh, here's where I massively screwed this up. And this is what I learned, yada, yada, yada. That kind of stuff really, really helps you to get the customer or the person who wants to contract with you in the sort of mindset where they understand that, oh, yeah, this guy solves problems and we can move forward, right? So, in that vein, I can sort of give you an idea, sort of how it works on the other side of the chair, rather than uh, being the person trying to do the interview and the sort of things you need to talk about. Actually, when you're administering the interview, you sort of have to trick your own mind into doing the right things so that you get the candidates that you want, because sort of the straightforward bull in a china shop way of actually going about trying to hire people doesn't really work as well as you think. So, for example, I was putting together these little puzzles on HackerRank. If you guys are not familiar with it, it's very, very popular. The point is, it's built sort of for you to build code that's not pseudocode. It actually runs. You have various test cases they can run it against so that they can show off their practical ability solving little problems. It's very much a practical test framework. And every job is going to build slightly different little puzzles that they want you to solve. But it turns out it's not actually useful for you to just come up with a bunch of problems for people to solve. Generally, what you actually want to do is almost always the same formula no matter what company you're in. It's going to be, I have a problem that people can solve in about an hour that is fairly straightforward. And I want you to tell me how you solved it, why you solved it that way, what are the sources of forward and backwards error here, and what are the performance implications of the algorithms you chose, because there's always going to be multiple steps in the solution of any problem. Each of them are going to have different computational complexity, and so you need to know all those things, because if people can tell you all that stuff, then there's a good chance that they actually have the technical chops to do it. But moving beyond that, you also want to throw a problem at them that is way too big for them to solve in the amount of time that they have, because you want to see what they do when they're given a hopeless situation, right? Because I mean, you can give them a super hard problem that, even if you know the algorithm that needs to be used, like say I need to build a B plus tree or a trie, or I need to build some kind of convolutional neural network to fix this, or I need to make a mimetic algorithm to solve the problem. The point is, you can go as hard as you want, but you want to see that they've tried a few things that are pretty out of the box and pretty complex, and they understand sort of where you want to go with this, so that you can see that they at least have a process for trying to get through things that are more than the time that's allotted, so that they can then tell you, look, this is just not going to work out. You want them to be pushing back against you, because that's an important part of, again, experience. It's when you know you're going to fail, how do you deal with it? That's a very useful thing to know about a prospective candidate. And you can actually take this to an extreme. You can make it a trick question. And for example, like on HackerRank, where you have test cases and stuff, you can give people subtle hints that it's a trick question by having test cases that are obviously not part of how the problem description works, that they just simply don't fit with how the problem description is. And that's very good with regard to, it allows people to pick up on what your game is fairly fast. And it's those little cues like that that can give you the opportunity to really find out if somebody's sharp. Because once they start sort of break the fourth wall, as they call it, where you're getting into the interviewer's head and you say, wait a minute, I know this game, I know this is what you're doing, and I see you and you see me, and we both understand each other right here. That is a very powerful sort of way that trust can be built, even when you don't see each other. It's just because you say, okay, I see this game, I know the game you're playing. It is something you're actually going to see in real life, with regard to the requirements that you're given can be entirely deceptive, or even downright adversarial. I mean, the most common version of this is called the XY problem, where a customer comes up to support and they say, hey man, I need this done. And it turns out that doing that will do nothing to solve their problem, because that's just what they think will solve their problem. And so you always have to walk them back to, well, actually, what is the thing you're actually trying to solve here? And when you see that from candidates, it's like, look, you've given me this problem here, but what are you actually trying to solve here? Because I'm seeing the data is not consistent with what you guys are actually saying that the problem is. So what this actually is an XY problem that you're giving me. And my whole goal here is to identify that that's actually what's happening. And so I need to go and ask follow-up questions. So the point at the end of the day is that you have to sort of sheep dip yourself into what their hyper reality is, which those are sort of some pretty postmodern terminology there for you. But in essence, you have to get inside their heads. You have to realize that every company, every person you're dealing with, they are living in a world that is entirely different from the one inside of your head and the people you go with. And you have to, as quickly as you possibly can, sort of try to get inside their heads. And this is true on both sides of the interview process, be it the candidate or the actual interviewer. The faster the interviewer can get into the candidate's head, the quicker they're going to know actually whether this person has what it takes. And similarly, the other person needs to get inside the interviewer's head as fast as they can so that they can know what they're expecting and either provide it or say, no, I'm not going to do that because that's just not my thing, right? Uh, Whatever you build your interview process to be, it needs to facilitate doing that as quickly as possible. You have to get mind meld as soon as you can possibly do. And when it is a very fast process, expedited, because even tech screens, they're going to be maybe 1, 2, 3 hours, and then follow up interviews, another maybe 2, 3 hours. You don't have a lot of opportunity to actually build these sorts of things. So you actually have to do a lot of thinking up front as to sort of how am I going to build the guardrails and how am I going to keep enforcing these boundaries so that we keep on track and we make sure that we know very quickly whether or not this is going to go in the direction we want it to or not. So that's about what I got for now. I'm going to be coming out with some more little war story videos here pretty soon, and I'll see you soon.